Hey you guys, Flickers of Fear time, my little movie review series, and this is the second installment of Giallo July. We're doing all Giallo movies this month, 2 every week. This one and the one that I did previously, these are going to be the only neo-giallos I'm talking about. From this point forward, they're all going to be like old from the classic era of giallos from the 1970s. So hopefully you guys are looking forward to that. But I did actually kind of want to talk about this one because this is one that I had kind of heard a lot about, that came up on a lot of lists of like neo-giallo movies, and it sounded kind of interesting. So I had to like give it a look. If you recall, in my previous review of the 2015 neo-giallo movie Francesca, I emphasized that though the movie did actually have a fairly standard murder mystery type of plot, which is, you know, common to these types of movies, its main attractions were mainly the visuals, the sound design, and, to some extent, too, the painstaking care that had been taken to recreate like the exact look and feel of a giallo movie from the era's heyday, like back in the early 1970s. Now, if that was true of that movie, take that sentiment and multiply it about 1 million times for today's movie, which is the 2013 very abstract giallo reconstruction, which is called The Strange Color of Your Body's Tears, which is like a classic fucking giallo-esque title. Now, I will say that, as I mentioned previously about a lot of other neo-giallos, this one is not attempting to recreate the look. Like Francesca, as I mentioned, was very, very obviously trying to look like a lost giallo film from the 1970s. Like, it was meant to look old. It was set back then. This one is actually set in what was then the modern day, 2013. You wouldn't really know that other than like a few characters using like the technology that they're using and things like that, because it's very insular and it's in like a very old Art Nouveau type building. But this isn't like trying to recreate that at all. But all of the stuff applies about this being a purely visual movie, and don't look for a plot. Seriously, we'll get into that. So this was made by Hélène Cattet, I think is how you pronounce her last name, and Bruno Forzani. Now, these two are a husband and wife filmmaking team. Now, they're both originally from France, but they're actually based out of Brussels, Belgium, and have been for several years. Now, they made several films. They made a movie back in 2017, which was like a weird Western called Let the Corpses Tan, which I saw like the beginning of, but I haven't like finished watching it yet. It looked kind of interesting. But more significantly, they also made another neo-giallo called Amer back in 2009. Now, this was actually like pretty well received by critics. I haven't seen it yet, although it's on my list. But from everything that I've read about it, what it is it's essentially like a plotless, very experimental film that's more like a series of vignettes, I guess, that is basically just sort of like utilizing the imagery and the archetypes of the giallo film, the genre, in order to explore kinds of themes of female sexual experimentation or maturation or something like that. So if you've seen that movie, this one is kind of along those same lines. So it's kind of more of the same. But this one, and like I said, I haven't seen Amer, so I'm not really sure. But like I said, they sound kind of similar. This movie, Strange Color, was so like relentlessly surreal that I would absolutely be lying if I told you that I had any fucking clue what was going on in this movie. I really did not. But not at all. Like, for the first 15-20 minutes, I was on fairly solid ground, and then after that it just goes like wild, and I'm just kind of like, okay, and then you just gotta like sit back and just let the visuals wash over you, because I'm not gonna say it doesn't make any sense. I think there's like something in there, but don't go into this like looking for a cohesive narrative, because I'm pretty sure there's not one. Okay, so like more than any other giallo movie, because you know how like a lot of people that aren't super into giallos, and it's like, oh, like the plots don't make any sense. Yeah, that's like this movie is like the equivalent of somebody saying a Dario Argento movie, oh, the plot doesn't make much sense, and this movie saying, here, hold my beer. You know what I mean? It's that kind of thing. This is like, it is the most plotless in the sense that it's not meant to be plot heavy. The plot is not the point of the exercise. This is very much an experimental film. It's very much an exercise in pure filmmaking, not so much like a narrative thing. So, okay, picture this. Picture if David Lynch's Lost Highway and Dario Argento's Inferno and Sergio Martino's All the Colors of the Dark. Picture if those three movies were people and then they had a three-way in this sort of blood-soaked attic crawl space that was painted with Alphonse Mucha murals, and then they all somehow collectively gave birth to a baby that was made completely out of hallucinogens, okay? Then you're kind of like partway there. That's how out there this movie is. It's very out there. So all that said, I would definitely not recommend this movie to anyone who wasn't like a complete giallo junkie and would appreciate it on those terms, or on the other sense, like somebody that's like really appreciative of like very experimental films. And even then, I'm not really sure, because I kind of feel like to get the most out of it, like I was saying about Francesca, you really have to be kind of well versed in like the tropes of giallo and like the symbolism, and you have to like know a lot about the visual language to get the most out of it. But if you're just into like shit with like crazy, like really beautiful, grotesque sort of visuals, then you might dig it too. Other than that, I don't really think I think this will probably just be like a beautiful endurance test, like for most people that aren't into that kind of thing. But despite that, I actually found it rather mesmerizing, like in a very kind of like nightmarish, what the fuck am I watching kind of way. The visuals are like very sumptuous, like all the set design is just like ridiculously gorgeous, and it does have a kind of like a veneer of like mystery to it. So there's like mysterious shit going on, so you are just kind of like, what the fuck, like is this all going to connect, or what the hell is even going on, or what does it all mean? So I did kind of like get into it that way. The only criticisms I'm going to say, some of the images did get slightly repetitive because some of them are repeated several times. So I felt like the runtime maybe could have been knocked down a tad. I mean, it's not super long. It's an hour and 40 minutes or something like that. But, just there was some repetition in there. I get why they were doing it, but, they probably could have like trimmed it down some. But that's really kind of the only criticism. But like I said, don't go into this thinking there's going to be like a story, because there's kind of not. It's mostly just a series of visuals. It's kind of like a weird, like, I don't know, like a dream sequence, like a very long, like dream sequence where you feel like there's some kind of like logic in there somewhere, but you can't really put your finger on what it is, okay? I mean, it's like overall, it's really like, let's call it like a feast for the senses, but absolutely approach this more as like a piece of visual art rather than a narrative film, and I think you'll be okay. So I'm going to try and give something of a synopsis, if that word even means anything in this context, but forgive me if it sounds a little bit disjointed, because to be honest, I'm not entirely clear on how all the pieces of the puzzle of this movie like fit together, or even if they're necessarily supposed to, or if they're like supposed to mean anything in particular. You'll kind of get the gist as I'm kind of like describing what's happening in this movie. So we start out with a businessman named Dan, who repeats several times that he's in telecommunications. I'm not sure if that's significant or not. Now, he's apparently been on a business trip to Frankfurt. So he's returning home to Brussels from Frankfurt. He's been there, I think, like 2 or 3 days or something like that. When he arrives back to his apartment building, which is, oh my God, this beautiful, like, Art Nouveau. And I guess it's like a real building where they shot it in Brussels. And I want to live there right now. It's like, oh my God, it's like fucking gorgeous. It's just like Art Nouveau, like murals all over the woodwork. I was just like, like all the wallpaper. I was just like heaving with kind of like, oh my God. Oh my God, the architecture porn. I was like so into it. And like the decor porn, I was like really into. I could have just watched it for that. Like I didn't even need any like dialogue or anything. I could have just watched it for all the like how beautiful it was. You know what I mean? So there was that. So he comes home to his apartment and he discovers that the door is locked from the inside, like it's locked and like the chain is on, but his wife is nowhere to be found. His wife, incidentally, is named Edwige, which is a little bit of a little kind of reference there to the gorgeous Edwige Fenech, who was actually in a bunch of giallo movies back in the 1970s, including several directed by the aforementioned Sergio Martino, including All the Colors of the Dark, which I mentioned earlier. She was in a bunch of his, actually. But she's kind of like well known for being in a lot of giallo movies during that time period. So Dan is naturally worried about where his wife has gotten off to, and becomes even more alarmed when he sees that the phone messages that he left, like over the few days of his trip, they're still on the answering machine and they haven't been accessed like the whole entire time that he was gone. So he goes around and like rings all the other tenants of the building. You know, it has that, you get the thing where you can like buzz up, you know, and stuff like that. We don't really have those here in Florida, but I know they have those in Europe and like some places up north and stuff like that. But you like buzz up to people's apartments and they can buzz you up. So he buzzes around to everybody. Pretty much nobody knows. They're like, who the fuck is that? We don't know what you're talking about. Or at least they tell him that they haven't seen her. But then he buzzes in one particular apartment, and a woman's voice tells him to come up to the 7th floor, like as if she possibly knows something. So when he gets up there to this woman's apartment, she's ostensibly sitting in the chair, like waiting for him. But all that he can see of her is like her legs from the knees down, and she has like these black witchy boots on, and she has like her hands she has like black lace gloves on, and her hands are like on the arm, you know, the armchair or the armrest of the chair, and that's all of her you can see. Like the rest of it, there's just kind of like a pool of light in the middle of the room, and then there's like where her upper half and her face and stuff are is just like impenetrable shadow. It's just like black. So he's like trying to peer in there, but he can't really see anything. So she gives him a cup of tea, and she starts to tell him her story. Now, it turns out that she doesn't seem to know exactly where Edwige is, but she does say, you know, my husband Paul also disappeared not very long ago under very strange circumstances. So then the movie kind of like goes off on sort of like a tangent or like a digression where it's talking about what happened to her and her husband. So essentially what happened to them is they're like in their bedroom and they hear like all these weird noises like up in the ceiling. And I'm not actually sure if this building has like an attic or if it's just like the roof up there and they're just like, what the fuck? Why is somebody up there? And they keep hearing all of these weird noises. So Paul goes, he's like a doctor and he has a stethoscope. So he goes up there and he starts like listening around like to the ceiling and everything like that. And then he drills like a little hole in there and he's trying to like look up in there, but he can't see anything. And then later somehow he gets up into the crawl space or the attic or whatever the fuck is up there to see what's going on, like what's making all the noise. So his wife is standing on the bed and kind of peering through the hole that he made. And she sees Paul's eye, like, on the thing. And he says, hey, it's, like, really dark up here. Can you, like, hand me up some matches so I can, like, look around? So she does that. Like, she puts matches up there. And Paul seems to be, like, looking around. She can hear him walking and stuff. But then he says something really weird about the people in here or the people up here or something like that. This movie's, like, in several different languages. I think there's French, obviously. I think some of it was Flemish, maybe. I think there might be some, I don't know if it was Dutch or Danish. I don't know what the fuck was going on in there. But it's, like, several different languages going on because I think a lot of the actors are from different places. So then, she hears him say that, like, someone else's eye appears, like, peering through the hole, and then there's, like, a sound, like a shing, like a blade, you know what I mean? And then, like, this single drop of blood, like, comes down through the hole and, like, lands on her face. So she kind of, like, tells that story. Dan is basically like, well, what the fuck does that have to do with, like, my wife disappearing? Which, I mean, it kind of does have something to do with maybe that's what happened to her, too, but he doesn't really seem to see, like, the similarity. So after a bit, he ends up leaving this creepy lady's apartment, having never seen her face, like, and she's obviously, like, getting really nervous because her teacup is shaking and she drops it and breaks and everything like that. So he's like, okay, well, fuck this noise. And he goes up to the roof, I'm guessing, like, to see what's up there. Like, maybe there's something up there. Maybe he's, like, checking it out. But he goes up to the roof, and then, like, standing there, just, like, casual as you please, is this completely naked brunette woman who's just, like, standing there at the edge, like, looking out over the city or whatever, just, like, smoking a cigarette. And he's just kind of like, sup, you know what I mean? They just, like, kind of stand there and smoke together, and it's like, no one explains anything, and I'm just kind of like, all right, this is that kind of movie. You can see. So there's that. Now, Dan does actually call the cops at some point, but the inspector that shows up to the apartment is really suspicious of him. And there's this really weird, like, interrogation scene where his face and the inspector's face, because all the dudes in this and all the women in this, more or less, more or less, look kind of similar to one another. So I think there's like some kind of like Lynchian identity kind of situation going on here, but I'm not entirely sure. But so they have like this interrogation where the inspector is asking him all these questions, and then like they'll intercut, like it'll be like, you know, Dan's, like the lower half of Dan's face and then the upper half of like the inspector's face, like split screen, and then there's like quarters. It's crazy. This has like all kind of like crazy like visual like camera tricks and all kind of like crazy shit like that. So yeah, so the cop is like suspicious of him, especially after he says, oh, you know, I think my wife might have been taken, or somebody that has something to do with it, like a suspect, is this bearded dude that I saw like acting kind of suspicious, and he went into the apartment across the hall. Now when they get the landlord in there, the guy that lives in that apartment doesn't look anything like the bearded dude, and he's like, I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about. There's no bearded dude that lives here, never has been. And the landlord like backs him up on that. Later on, Dan even thinks he sees this same bearded dude in his own apartment for a minute, but he doesn't have any idea like how he might have got in there, or if it's like some kind of ghost or what the fuck. He doesn't know. There's also another kind of strange digression, because it's almost kind of like he's going to the different apartments trying to figure out what happened to his wife, but then like everybody that lives in those apartments has their own like weird ass shit going on, and they're kind of like telling him about it. So it goes like into all these like weird different stories, like of other people's stories that are all sort of interconnected, like in a kind of way. So this other digression has to do with this man, and I'm not sure if it's the bearded dude or not. Like I said, they all kind of look similar, so I'm not like entirely sure like who's who. So there's a guy, and he's in a dark room, and he's taking pictures of either the same brunette that was naked up on the roof, or just another brunette that kind of like looks like her. Not entirely sure. The dark room seems to be situated right behind this woman's bedroom, I'm thinking, because like he can watch her sleeping and she's naked and stuff, and the photographer can like see everything she does through like a one-way glass pane, but I'm not entirely clear on whether she knows it's there and like it was put there on purpose, or if somebody else put it there and they're spying on her. I don't really know. This particular sequence also involves this weird woman that's like all in red. Just like a red leather dress, red boots, like a red hat with like a red veil over her face, like you can't see who she is. Like she follows some people around, she kills one motherfucker, she like meets somebody, and they're, you know, exchanging some shit like in this crazy building with all these columns and stuff. I don't know what the fuck's going on. I don't know who that is. So as if this wasn't like incoherent enough, it gets even more out there like from that point on. And from here on out, I can't really remember in what order some of these events happened, but I don't think it really matters all that much, because like I said, this is not, you know, a plot point A to point B to point C. It's just very dreamlike. And so it's just like a kind of a series of images which all kind of seem interconnected in some way. But I don't think, I even saw like another review of this where they said, well, probably you could rearrange all the scenes in any order you wanted and it wouldn't make any difference. And I think that's probably the case. Maybe there was a couple things that you'd have to put at the beginning to like, you know, establish it. But after that, it really doesn't seem to matter. Like all bets are off. I mean, for instance, there's one sequence, which like I said, was very David Lynchian, or I kind of perceived it that way. Like Dan gets woken up by his doorbell buzzing, like in the middle of the night, it looks like. And then he goes and looks out at the security camera, but it looks like he's standing out there, like wanting to be let in, even though he's inside, you know what I mean? Like it's his doppelganger or something. This scene is actually like repeated several times with slight variations and like slightly different outcomes like each time. One or more of the versions seems to imply that one version of Dan killed another version of Dan. So like I said, I think there's like some identity or some kind of, not, I don't know if I want to say possession necessarily, but it could be that. It could be like shading over into that. At one point too, and like I said, I was gonna say spoiler alert, but really, like I said, the plot isn't really the main thing about this, or even a thing, so it doesn't really, the concept of spoilers like really doesn't apply in this situation. But at one point in the movie, Dan seems to find Edvija, that's his wife, like her severed head, like lying in bed next to him one morning. Like he wakes up and he sees her and he's like, oh, it's her, oh shit, it's just like her head or whatever. And he does mention this to the police, but the head is never found and it's not mentioned again after that. So I don't know. Dan, also with the help of the bearded man from earlier, who he initially thought was a suspect, like the dude talks to him through the wall, very Dario Argento's Inferno. That's like for real what it reminded me of, and I'm sure that's what they were homaging. So with the help of that guy, he discovers that the entire building is like catacombed with hidden passages like behind all the walls. And that's how people can get into and out of all the apartments without being seen in the hallways. That's how the bearded guy like turned up in his apartment and stuff like that. So people can like go around behind the walls and like look in other people's apartments, like through the stained glass and all this other kind of stuff. There's also this whole, which seems to be the whole like crux of the mystery, I guess, is this strange woman named Laura, who's also like a brunette woman. Now, apparently this woman used to live in the building and was really into kind of like sadistic or like transgressive, like sexual practices, like as a way to, I don't know if she's trying to like get out of her body or something like that, or to like access some otherworldly, other interdimensional, I'm not entirely sure like what that was doing. But people in the building who remember her, they all insist, well, you know, it can't be her. She'd be an old woman now. So apparently they're saying like that's a long time ago. But there is apparently like some version of her that's still lurking around, evidently, in the guise of this ever-changing like brunette woman who may or may not be the same person, or who knows. Yeah, so there's like all these brunette women kind of like lurking around. You know, there's pictures, like photographs of like different brunette women who kind of all look similar. Now, it's speculated at one point, and I can't remember which character said this, but that Dan's wife, Edwige, got involved with Laura's experiments in sexual sadism. Like, she went up to the 7th floor or whatever, like that apartment, and got into it because she was bored with Dan, or she didn't like Dan anymore, or she wanted to destroy him or something like that. And maybe she went up there and got involved with that, and then she got killed, like, because of it. You know, whether during the thing or somebody killed her because she knew too much or something like that. It's also barely possible, I suppose, that Dan was actually Laura the whole time, and the entire film is kind of a long hallucinatory nightmare sequence in which he finally comes to terms with this fact, and that maybe he killed his wife himself. But I mean, I could be totally talking out of my ass there. That might totally not be what's going on. But that was one possibility that did occur to me. Later, there's this bizarre and yet still quite beautiful sequence shot entirely in black and white. And it's filmed in this really kind of like herky-jerky, almost like a series of stills, you know what I mean? Like kind of put together. And this takes place after the landlord finds what is presumably like Laura's diary. Like she's talking about why she does certain things. I mean, and during this sequence, there's like a hat box or like a set of hat boxes. This one hat box, which is like black and white striped, has a hat in it, but then sometimes it doesn't have a hat in it. And then at one point, like a dude in a hat like comes out of the hat box, very Babadook, and it comes out of the hat box, and then he's just like this shadow dude, and he's like chasing this woman. And then at one point they're both like underneath the wallpaper, and it's like bulging like while he's like pursuing her like under the wallpaper. Then he like pursues her like through this big hole in the wall, like through this tunnel and shit like that. It almost looks like animation, but it's photographs. Yeah, it's like, it's super, super weird. There are also a whole bunch of like recurring images of black and white scenes of like nude women having like knives pressed against their throats or things like that. One oft repeated image of kind of like a straight razor being brushed over a woman's like erect nipple. So there's a lot of nudity in this too. So, you know, just know that going in. A bunch of people get stabbed in the tops of their heads, like with big like blades and stuff. And the stab wounds on all of those people look very obviously like vaginas. You have a lot of like extreme close-ups of eyeballs. At one point, it looks like a person climbs into or out of another person. A woman is like fed a single pearl while she's sleeping and like coughs it up later. This is not explained. There's kind of one kind of cool scene where there's like all this kind of plastic hanging and there's like a body up in the thing, but there's all this blood like kind of speckled all over the plastic, and it looks just like a bunch of rubies. It's like really cool looking. There's kind of like one scene where Dan like goes to this woman who I presume is Laura and like takes her robe off, so she's like naked, but then she starts like glowing like a fucking supernova or some shit like that. It's crazy. I mean, it's all very like I said, grotesque, and it's very impressionistic. And I mean, the images are very provocative, but they only really seem to make sense in the context of like a dream logic kind of way. And I think that that was kind of the entire objective of the movie. This is more like a movie of sensation and feeling, not really of like analysis, I guess. You know, so while there is a story thread in there about Dan and his missing wife and kind of how maybe she had these forays into sort of like sexual extremes of like this sadistic torture and maybe madness, and also the fact that maybe all these other people in the building, there's all this weird voyeuristic shit with all these people like creeping around behind the walls and like watching other people, and maybe they all knew Laura too, and there was all kind of something to do with that. So there is kind of like a story thread in that sense, but I think the whole intention of the movie was more to sort of use this iconic symbolism and all of these like visual hallmarks of the, you know, of the classic of the giallo genre to sort of make this multi-layered kind of visual dismantling of the essence of the genre, I guess, is what they were trying to do. While they're also maybe possibly, I could be totally wrong about this, but maybe telling a sort of like obtuse story about, you know, just the allure of like peeking into other people's intimate lives and maybe sort of like the dangers of exploring the far limits of sexual power dynamics, something like that. Or, you know, as another possibility, it could have been something maybe more akin to this hilariously dismissive and but not entirely inaccurate, but I did like this movie, so I thought this did make me laugh. So this is a review that was in The Guardian, and they had a very impatient 1-star review of this movie, and they opened it by comparing this movie to, quote, a feature-length advert for a perfume that would smell like tuberose, leather, and rotting meat, with top notes of fake blood and old cheese. And I was kind of like, it's a little reductive, but it's not untrue. I mean, you know what I mean? This does play very much like a feature length. There is dialogue, but much like Francesca, there's not a huge amount of dialogue, and there's a lot of sequences with just score and visuals. So this would actually play very well. I'm not going to say you don't need the dialogue. I mean, you do kind of, otherwise you'd be completely at sea and not know what was going on. But I mean, if you just wanted to like watch this like a visual experience, you don't really need to know what's going on, because even if you listen to all the dialogue closely, you probably won't figure it out anyway. And I don't really think that that was the point of the movie. So, you know, so I'm just saying that. So like I said, if you're not super into giallo movies, and you're not super into like arty movies, then stay far away from this one, because it will probably just like try your fucking patience like within the first few minutes. I mean, maybe not the first few minutes, because it's not coherent like from the jump, but at least it does seem to kind of have like a narrative thing like at the beginning, but then it just goes off into this phantasmagoria of like all of these kind of giallo-esque images that seem interconnected somehow, but you're not entirely sure how they are. So like I said, it's just kind of like a very dream logic, nightmarish kind of movie. But that said, if you know that going into it, it is actually like really, really beautiful to look at, and like pretty much every scene of it is just like some kind of like cool shit going on. So whether you want to like watch an hour and 40 minutes of that is entirely up to you. But, you know, I quite enjoyed it. You know, I'm more like the murder mystery aspects of, you know, giallo of old, but I actually really do respect this as, you know, just like a piece of art, even if not as a narrative film. So that will do it for this Flickers of Fear, our second installment on Giallo July, and we'll be doing another one on the next one. So I will see you guys then. Bye.